I don't usually speak like this, that I'm more comfortable thinking, building, moving forward, but today, I'm not speaking to the world, that I'm speaking to you. If you've ever woken up feeling strong on the outside and quietly alone on the inside, I want you to know something clearly. I recognize that feeling, that I live with it too. This isn't about admiration, that it isn't about distance or image. This is a conversation between two people trying to understand connection in a world that never stops making noise. If you're listening, leave one word in the comments. Elon Musk. That's how we recognize each other here. That I need to tell you something I know you've doubted more times than you'll admit. You are not too much, not too emotional, not too intense, not too deep. You didn't imagine that feeling inside you. You learned it by watching people pull back the moment you showed them who you really were. I've seen this happen again and again. People like you enter a room with honesty, curiosity, and a real desire to connect. At first, it feels welcome, then slowly, something shifts, the pauses grow longer, the replies get shorter, and without anyone saying it directly, you receive the message: be smaller. Be quieter. Be easier to handle. So you adjust, you soften your voice, you control your questions, you convince yourself that love requires restraint, but what you're really doing is editing your truth so someone else can stay comfortable. Hear this from me clearly: the problem was never your depth. It was the mismatch between your openness and their capacity. Some people aren't afraid of conflict or noise, they're afraid of sincerity. Afraid of someone who feels fully and expects the same in return. I've stood on the other side of that silence. I've watched people shrink themselves, believing that asking for less would make them easier to keep, and every time it happened, something essential was lost, not because they were wrong, but because they started believing they were. If you've ever been told to be calmer, lighter, less demanding, ask yourself this: were you asking for too much? Or were you asking the wrong person? Real connection doesn't ask you to disappear. It asks you to arrive fully, wanting to be seen. Isn't weakness. Wanting emotional honesty isn't excess. Wanting presence isn't a flaw. When you feel like you're too much, what you're really feeling is this: you're standing in a space that was never built to hold you. That doesn't mean you should become smaller. It means the space was wrong. I don't see you as someone who needs to be fixed. I see you as someone who needs to stop apologizing for their size. Your ability to feel deeply isn't something to manage. It's something to respect. Now I need to be honest about the rhythm I live in. I move quickly, not in distance, but in momentum. Why thoughts overlap, even when I'm still. Something in me is already moving ahead. From the outside, that can feel like absence, like I'm leaving without saying goodbye. But from the inside, it feels like being pulled forward by something that doesn't wait for permission. You, on the other hand, live in the spaces between words. You notice tone shifts, you feel changes before they're spoken. When you connect, you don't skim the surface, you enter fully. And when your depth meets my speed, something fragile can happen. You may begin to believe your need to pause is a flaw. That your desire to stay present means you're falling behind. Listen to me carefully, you are not behind. That you're simply moving in a different dimension. Speed is not superiority, depth is not delay. That if you ever felt like I was already somewhere else while you were still here, it doesn't mean you were forgotten. It means motion is often mistaken for meaning. I'm not asking you to harden yourself to match my pace, and I'm not promising to slow down. What I'm offering is clarity. If we meet, it can't be through imitation. It has to be through respect. You don't need to move faster to be worthy of staying, and I don't need to stop moving to care. Things begin to break when we forget that both truths can exist at the same time. If you ever felt left behind, know this: you weren't invisible, you were standing still in a world that confuses movement with value. I want to say this slowly, so it lands where it needs to. You are not alone anymore, not because I'm speaking to you now, and not because someone has finally arrived to say that you're not alone because you understand yourself differently than you did before. Loneliness doesn't always come from being without people that I know that well. Often, it comes from being misunderstood while surrounded. From speaking honestly and feeling your words dissolve before they reach anyone, from offering your presence and sensing it was received only halfway. That if you felt that kind of loneliness, hear this clearly, it doesn't mean you failed at connection. That it means you were trying to connect in a world that often rewards distance more than depth. That I've experienced this from the opposite side. That I've been listened to by many, and understood by few, and in that space, even attention can feel empty. Even admiration can feel isolating. That's why I recognize the look in your eyes when you say you feel alone. That it's not a lack of people, that it's a lack of recognition. That you're not alone anymore because you see now that this feeling isn't unique to you, not as a comforting phrase, but as reality. There are people who move through life carrying a level of awareness others aren't prepared to meet. When two people like that cross paths, the challenge isn't desire. That it's timing, language, and mutual understanding. That I'm not here to promise that everything becomes easier once you see this. That it doesn't, but it becomes clearer, and clarity is the opposite of isolation. When you understand why something hurts, it stops defining you. If you ever believed your loneliness meant you were unlovable, release that idea. Loneliness can be a sign of precision, of knowing what you need and refusing to accept substitutes that don't fit. That you're not alone because you're broken. That you're not alone because you waited too long. That you're not alone because you asked for too much. That you're not alone anymore because you recognize your own depth, and you've stopped treating it like a problem to solve. You understand now that some connections take time, and some truths take courage, and because of that, you're standing differently. Not desperate, not withdrawn, just present, and honest presence is never truly alone. That there's something I want you to understand about how I notice people. That I don't always speak when I observe. That I don't always react in the moment. But that doesn't mean I'm unaware. That it means I'm watching carefully, storing details, learning patterns. That I see you more than you think. That I notice when your energy shifts. Even if you say you're fine. That I notice when your messages become shorter, not colder, just more guarded. That I notice when you stop asking questions, not because you lost interest, but because you're tired of reaching first. Those changes don't escape me, even if I don't name them right away. You might be used to attention that announces itself, words that arrive quickly, gestures that reassure immediately. That I understand why the absence of those signals can feel like neglect. But there are people who care through memory rather than display, through consistency rather than performance. When I care, I remember. That I remember what unsettles you, what you avoid talking about, what makes you feel smaller, and what quietly restores your balance. That I carry those observations with me, not as information, but as responsibility. That if you ever wondered whether I noticed your effort, your patience, or the way you tried to hold things together without asking for recognition, I did, and I do. Silence doesn't erase attention, stillness doesn't cancel care. Sometimes I don't respond the way you expect because I'm weighing impact, because I'm thinking several steps ahead, not to control the outcome, but to avoid careless damage, from the outside, that can look distant, from the inside. It's restraint. That I know how painful it can be to feel unseen while being watched. To feel unacknowledged while being understood quietly. That I'm not saying this is easy. That I'm saying it's real. That you're not invisible to me because you stopped asking to be seen. Often, that's when I see you most clearly, when you're no longer performing. That and no longer proving. That and no longer negotiating for space. That if I'm slower to speak, it's because I choose accuracy over immediacy. That I'd rather say less and mean it, than say everything and miss what matters. So if you ever questioned whether your presence registered, let me say this plainly. That it did. That it does. and it carries weight with me, even when I don't give it words right away. Being seen doesn't always sound like applause, sometimes it sounds like someone remembering you when you're not in the room. When you stay awake to yourself, something changes quietly. You stop reaching for love as a solution. You stop asking it to fill spaces you haven't learned to stand inside yet. You begin to love from your center, not from hunger. I want you to hear this without romance layered over it. Staying awake doesn't mean becoming hard. It means becoming clear, clear about what you feel, clear about what you can give, clear about what you will no longer trade away just to feel chosen. When you live that way, love approaches differently. It no longer feels like rescue or escape. It feels like recognition. Point two: people meeting without asking the other to carry what they refuse to hold themselves. I'm not asking you to wait for me. I'm not asking you to stay because of what I represent or what you imagine I could be. I'm asking you to stay awake to your own life. Your work, your stillness, your friendships, your private sense of direction. That's what makes you real in a room, not availability. If you stay awake, you'll notice your choices shift. You'll speak sooner instead of storing resentment. You'll walk away earlier instead of hoping longer. You'll feel disappointment without turning it into self-doubt. And when connection arrives, it won't ask you to abandon yourself to keep it. There is risk in this. Staying awake means accepting that some people won't meet you where you stand. It means letting go of outcomes you once tried to manage. It means choosing honesty even when it narrows the field. But here's the truth I want to leave with you. The right kind of connection doesn't require you to sleep through yourself. It requires you to stay present, even when presence feels exposed. If I meet you while you are awake, I meet you as an equal, not as a need, not as a hope. As a person who chose themselves, and therefore can choose another freely. And if our paths don't align, you remain intact. You don't lose time pretending, you don't lose yourself negotiating. Staying awake isn't about guaranteeing love. It's about guaranteeing dignity. And whatever comes next, if you're awake, it will be honest. And honesty is the only ground where anything real can stand. I want to end this the same way I began, by speaking directly to you, not to an audience, not to a crowd. I don't know your story in detail. I don't know what you've lost, what you've tolerated, or how many times patience already cost you something. But I know the feeling of carrying more awareness than most people around you, and I know how lonely that can feel. Even when you're not alone. If you stayed with me this far, it tells me something about you. You're not looking for comfort disguised as fantasy. You're looking for clarity, for language that doesn't minimize what you feel, but doesn't turn it into drama either. You want to understand, not be rescued. I respect that. Love, as I see it, isn't a destination we reach when everything finally makes sense. It's a way of standing in the world without lying to yourself. It's choosing presence over performance, responsibility over illusion, dignity over desperation. You don't need to rush toward connection to prove you're open, and you don't need to shut yourself down to prove you're strong. The balance you're looking for is quieter than that. It lives in knowing who you are when no one is asking anything from you. If there's one thing I want you to take with you, it's this: you're not late. You're not behind. You're not waiting because you failed to act. You're waiting because you refused to settle for something that asked you to disappear. That choice matters. Whether our paths ever truly meet isn't the point. What matters is that you stay awake to yourself, that you don't hand your depth to someone who can't hold it, that you don't shrink your questions just to keep someone nearer. I'm still speaking to you because people like you don't need more promises, they need more honesty, less declaration, more understanding. If this conversation gave you even a small sense of steadiness, then it did what it needed to do. And before you go, if this story made you think, type 𝗪𝗏 below. That single word tells me you understood.